neutral schools which are based on particular pedagogical views, like Montessori schools. I don't know if anyone knows, but because in Poland we don't have schools, but these are different schools based on diverse concepts of social life, of different not necessarily worldviews, but different ways of perceiving the world, like ecological schools, and all lessons are organized, I don't know, in a wood or somewhere. And this is just the whole total freedom of education. This is how this freedom is defined in the Netherlands. That's why I said I will define this term, because it is not the same as in Poland. We have also, of course, public schools, which are not really so popular, because Catholic and Protestant schools are the most popular schools in the Netherlands, in the secularized society in the Netherlands. Then schools which combine different worldviews, Hindu, Islamic schools, of course, and Jewish schools. In 1981, another act on primary education was introduced, and the main provision of this act was that education in public schools should rest upon the respect for religions and worldviews of all pupils. So that's why in the Netherlands, in general, schools are relatively free to choose their own concept of religious, or rather worldview education. So they may choose a humanist education, or the lesson of ethics lesson, or cultural or religious studies. So they can refer to different traditions, and they are free to do so. And 2 years later, the new constitution was established, and in the final part of my presentation, I will try to compare these two constitutions of 1953 and 1983. And Article 23 of this constitution introduced freedom of education, and this freedom, again, refers not only to the profile of a school, so it can be Catholic, Protestant, neutral, and so on, but also it is the freedom to establish a school. So in the Netherlands, each group of parents, for example, can establish their own school based on their own worldviews and concepts, ideas, but a number of different criteria should be met. So that's why the state funding of schools is also, well, it involves state control. It's total control, not on the content, but on the quality, over the quality of education. Now, with legislative developments, I will shortly just briefly present three constitutions. So, Constitution of 1917 introduced freedom of religion, equal position and protection of confessional communities, banned discrimination on religious grounds, and introduced state funding of confessional communities, so churches in that period, and confessional schools. And it was a constitutional provision. In 1953, another constitution, and it is just this last period in the process of pillarization, because the process of erosion started just in the late 1960s. So this constitution was based on the concept of the collaboration of church and state, also because of state funding of confessional communities, like in the former constitution. It confirmed freedom of religion, equal position and protection of confessional communities, ban on discrimination, of course, and freedom of education. And the last constitution of 1983, that was based rather on separation than collaboration, especially with comparing to this constitution of 1953. And it referred to this individualist dimension. I will refer to this in the last part of my presentation. And it defined freedom of religion in the very first article of the Constitution, together with other social rights and so on in this law. And in this definition, all persons in the Netherlands shall be treated equally in equal circumstances. Discrimination on the grounds of religion, belief, political opinion, race, or sex, or on any other grounds whatsoever shall not be permitted. And now, the comparison of the constitutions of 1953 and 1983. With regard to freedom of religion, in the first constitution, and this constitution is maybe many of the provisions of this constitution are based on the constitution of 1917. That's why I did not include this constitution of 1917 in this comparison. So freedom of religion was defined in a very detailed way. A number of articles defined freedom of religion, while in 1983 this freedom of religion was defined in a very generic and lapidary way. And that's why also in the Dutch system of law, different commissions and other bodies play a very important role, because many of the principles of freedom of religion, or the definition of freedom of religion, have not been included in this constitution. Then the stress on the collective dimension in 1953 and this individualist dimension in 1983. And the last part, in both constitutions and also in the constitution of 1917, the freedom of education and state funding of all schools were guaranteed by the state. Thank you very much.
Dr. Szymigowska, thank you very much for your speech. As I read today's schedule, I think that today's topics differ a lot, so I'd like to change the schedule a bit, and I'd like to ask you to ask the questions right now, so that we have the discussion after each speech. So are there any questions? So maybe I'd like to ask one question. I'm interested in the aspect of freedom of education. You said about the you said ecological schools, that some lessons are in woods. Could you tell me how does it really work? How is it possible to I can't really imagine the fact that some lessons are in the woods, or how does it really work?
Yeah, so I think I simplified this a bit, but in fact such lessons can be organized. These are very small groups of pupils, but these lessons are organized always in the open space, and they are never organized at schools, in school buildings. And this is just based on this very concept of ecological schools. This concept is based on the idea of just promoting this style of life, and this is possible in the Netherlands. Of course, a number of different criteria should be met by the teachers, and the quality of education is controlled. Otherwise, the school does not receive any subsidies from the state. So that's the requirement. But this is possible in the Netherlands as long as all these criteria are met and the quality, the standards of education are still high.
And do you think that such lessons would be possible in Poland?
No, of course not, because of the system of law, of course. But no, it is just, in the Netherlands, this Dutch system of education is totally different. So it is based just on the total freedom of education, but this freedom is not unlimited, of course, because it is still controlled by the state.